Aloha kako. Welcome to the last workshop in a series of four, sponsored by Kahumanu Farms on breadfruit. And today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of harvest and post-harvest, and in particular preparation and production. So my name's Noa Lincoln. I am a professor at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in a position called Indigenous Crops and Cropping Systems. I'm also a farm. I'm the founder and president of Malakala Ulu Cooperative, where we are restoring the traditional breadfruit belt of South Kona. I'm also a production advisor for the Hawaii Ulu Producers Cooperative, as well as several other farms, um, and serve on the board of a number of agricultural organizations, um, including the Hawaii Farmers Union United. So yeah, like I said, this is the fourth in a series of four of workshops. Again, generously sponsored by Kahumanu Farms. We did a first workshop in person at the farm back in February, where we really covered the history and kind of contemporary production of breadfruit in Hawaii, and its role in our food systems. Um, our second workshop was virtual back in May. And this one we really focused on breadfruit habitat, the different varieties, the timing of their fruiting and flowering, and nutrient management of the trees. Our third workshop in September was again a virtual recorded workshop where we focused a bit on propagation, pruning, orchard planning, and then delved a little further into nutrient management. And again, today we'll talk about more at the end of the process, harvesting the fruit and using the fruit. So, breadfruit is a fruit. It ripens and matures over time. And this is an image from the Breadfruit Production Guide by Craig Elovich and others. There are several other similar diagrams out there, but essentially just a nice capture of the life cycle of the fruit. So from the time you see the female flower on the tree, it's about 20 weeks until the fruit fully matures. Um, and the fruit initially goes through a large growth stage. So the fruits get larger until they become about full sized at about week 12 to 13. And then the fruit kind of switches gears, and instead of getting bigger and bigger, it starts to lay down its starch reserves. So it builds up its carbohydrates and its starch over the next several weeks. And then that brings you into that mature stage. Um, and that mature stage is variable. It can start as early as 16 weeks, but in general, it's about the 18-week time point that you get a nice peak mature fruit. Um, Maturity is not the end stage of the breadfruit. So after the mature stage, the fruit then starts to ripen. And in this stage, a lot of the starches begin to get converted into sugars. Some of the latex starts to get converted into fatty acids. And so you see a shift in the nutrient profile and the taste and texture of the fruit as it really softens and sweetens in that final stage. And it's important that we get the terminology correct. So a lot of people talk about that peak maturity, they call that ripe. And that's kind of an incorrect term. We really do want to talk about that high starch potato like stage as being mature. and ripe being the stage at which the flesh sweetens and gets softer. And that just helps people to communicate about the fruit and know what we're talking about. So most people, most fruit out there is harvested at the mature stage. So these are just a couple simple graphs for some work that we did in the lab, just tracking fruit throughout their development. So this is the fruit diameter in the blue, and just kind of reiterates what I said, that the fruits kind of max out in size by about week 12. And then from there, they really don't grow much, but they do continue to change their nutrient profile. And we do see that even though the fruits don't get bigger, they do continue to get heavier during that period. And so the red line showing weight, that the fruits do get heavier and heavier. And then you see this downtick right at the end. That's that transition from mature to ripe. And they actually can lose a little weight during that period as they burn up some of their starches to produce sugars. And here is that starch graph. So kind of, yeah, your less digestible carbohydrates. And you can again see that week 12 is really a critical point. So for about the first 10 or 11 weeks, starch stays really low as the fruit grows. And then right at that point, at week 11 or 12, you see the starch content just start to skyrocket, growing from about 10% up to about 60% dry weight over that later period as the fruit matures. And in general, if we look at aspects of fat and protein and fiber, we kind of see the same general pattern of a transition point happening around week 12. Um, so for protein, fat, and fiber, you generally decline over the first 10 weeks. And this is just a dilution process as the fruit grows and gets bigger and heavier. The amount of protein and fat and fiber kind of gets diluted by the mass of the fruit. And then after week 12, we see it kind of stabilize and level off there. And finally, just a similar story for our minerals and elements within the fruit. So this is just looking at nitrogen in blue, potassium in red, and calcium in green. And again, just showing that general pattern of decline in the early growth of the fruit and stabilization as you get into the mature stage. So returning to this slide and knowing um, what we know about the changing profile of the fruit, we can see that the really young, immature fruit are characterized by really low starch and much higher fiber, fat, and mineral content. As you get into the full-size green, you still have low starch, but your fiber and nutrients also drop down considerably. And then as you get into this mature phase, you get the very high starch content. And then finally in the ripe stage, again, we see a decrease in starch, which is coupled with an increase in sugars. And so the fruit really behaves quite differently at the different stages of development, depending what you want to do with it. So these really young, immature fruit are actually quite vegetable-like. They are used quite a bit in salads and pickles and things like that. These immature, full-sized green ones, to me, are really the worst stage to use them at. Again, they're large, but they've diluted everything. They don't have the starches. They don't have the fiber, the fat, the protein. They have a really kind of odd flavor profile in this juvenile stage. As they get into mature, again with the high starches, this is really when breadfruit kind of behaves like the staple that it's hailed as, acts a lot like a potato or other kind of really high starch staples. And then as those starches decline and the sugars come up, and the fruit softens, that ripeness adds a lot of flavor, adds a lot of sweetness. And so at that ripe stage, it becomes very popular in dessert items and other things that you want that sweet breadfruit flavor for. So there's a lot of things that could be said about harvesting. Um, that is the type of thing that's really best done in person. So we won't spend too much time on it here. Um, but I do want to point out that, like all fruit, or really any produce, appropriate handling of the fruit is really important. Um, and in particular, as breadfruit trees get quite large, it's not great practice just to cut them and let them free fall onto the ground. Um, the fruits do bruise or lacerate, and we have done some initial post-harvest work showing that fruit that is bruised or dropped um, does shorten in shelf life considerably. So it enhances ethylene production, it enhances softening of the fruit, and overall your fruit will rot a lot quicker. So traditionally, and actually, if you go to a lot of Pacific Islands today, a lot of the harvesting is done by hand, especially by the young boys. They get sent up the trees to climb up the tree and get out on the branches and um, yeah, harvest the fruit by hand and toss it down to somebody at the ground who tends to have a woven basket, and they'll catch the fruit to break its fall and not let it hit the ground. Um, Another common method traditionally was a long pole that has a V-shaped tip. So you tie on a second thin flat pole at the tip to create a little V wedge. And you take that wedge and you pinch the stem with it, and you twist the stick, which pops the stem off the tree. But then that V kind of acts like a clothespin and pinches the stem, and then the fruit doesn't drop, but you can lower it to the ground with the stick. Today, there's all sorts of options for things like that. Uh, I really like the grab and hold pickers that have a little squeeze handle, and that cuts the clippers, which cuts the stem, but it also engages the grabber, which grabs the stem and lets you bring it down slowly. There's, of course, other things like basket pickers or pickers with nets in it that slow the fall of the fruit. Um, so a lot of options out there today. Um, and the V-notch stick still works really good. Oh, the other thing I was going to say here, um, harvesting, how easy or hard it is to harvest is a very varietal dependent thing. Actually, kind of just came to this revelation the other day, harvesting in our variety trial. But Otea has these big fat fruits with this really, really short peduncle, really short stem. And that huge fruit is like right up against the branch, and it's actually really hard to get a picker around this big fruit to the stem to cut the stem. On the other end of the spectrum, something like Fiti, which has these really, really long stems, sometimes like a foot long, and the fruits really hang down off the branch, much, much easier to harvest with the whole range of things in between. So it's something I hadn't really considered before with the different varieties, is how hard or easy they are to harvest. But they do certainly differ in that respect. We definitely encourage everyone to have good farm food safety and good protocols on your farm. Um, and there are a range of resources you can access on the internet. If you search for good agricultural practice, and there is a what they call the GAP certification in Hawaii now to get certified as a good ag producer. And it's really pretty basic things, right? Not putting your produce on the ground, keeping manure away from your harvested fruits, not spraying any pesticides or having animals near the fruit, within X amount of days of harvest. So just basic things that you should have in place for ensuring that your farm is safe and healthy. Once you harvest the fruit, there's kind of several simple steps that you should usually go through. Um, the first is to fully clip the stem and take that fruit and turn it upside down and let the sap drain out for a couple minutes. Um, this will alleviate a lot of the latex problems. Once those fruit drain, it's important to cool them down as quickly as you can to slow the ripening. So we suggest, a ice water bath. Obviously, getting ice water on a farm is obviously not too easy. So even a tap water soak can help to lower the core temperature of the fruit. But the quicker you can get it, out of the sun, into a cool area, is better. Um, there's actually been a decent amount of work looking at storage of breadfruit, in particular at different temperatures. And just about 55 degrees Fahrenheit is essentially the perfect temperature. It's the temperature that extends the shelf life the longest without causing negative effects on the fruit. So if you go below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, you tend to start getting chilling damage. The skin will turn black. The fruit can dry out or get discolored. Um, so yeah, that level of refrigeration, that's kind of the gold standard. And that's the one piece of post-harvest for breadfruit that actually has been really well researched and documented. So once you have your fruit, there's a whole bunch of things you can do with it. Uh, so we'll quickly look at some forms of preparation and processing here. So traditionally, breadfruit was commonly either steamed or baked, either in imu underground ovens or umu above ground ovens. Uh, Oftentimes it was pounded into poi, much like kalo, but more often, the most common way you see breadfruit prepared is with coconut milk. And these two plants, coconut and breadfruit, are very often found together in the same zones of cultivation throughout the Pacific. And they're constantly consumed together as well. And so, a very common traditional dish, fa'alifu, um, is again basically just breadfruit with the coconut milk kind of evaporated down. That breadfruit really sucks up the sweetness of the coconut. It keeps the flesh of the ulu really moist and So this was and continues to be one of the favorite ways to prepare breadfruit in the Pacific. In places in the Pacific that depended on breadfruit as a core staple, um, they needed ways to make breadfruit last throughout the year. If breadfruit is your primary staple, and you only have, a productive breadfruit season of 6 to 8 months, means you got to find a way to get through those other 3, 4, 5 months of the year on breadfruit. And so this was mainly done through fermentation. Underground pits were dug, and the breadfruit was placed in these pits and covered, and it goes into a lactic acid ferment, just like sauerkraut or kimchi, and this lowers the pH of the fruit and preserves it. Basically, it's a acid preservation. And at a later time, these pits could be opened up. The mash is kind of washed and revived. Typically, it's recooked and eaten that way. Today, a much broader range of culinary usage of breadfruit. Um, like we said, the young fruits are much more vegetable-like. A lot of people compare it to artichoke hearts or heart of palm in texture and taste. And so, yeah, very popular in salads as well as pickling. And so we see a number of pickle products created from the baby breadfruit. The easiest ones can be a simple oil marinade, a lot like artichoke heart marinade, um, and that is enough to preserve the fruit. Um, and yeah, they are delicious. They A lot of times people call them pickles, ulu pickles, but they don't have the crunchy texture of a pickle typically. It is typically more that creamy texture, again, kind of like a heart of palm or artichoke heart. Breadfruit fries are another very popular way to prepare them today. Um, so you can make chips, fries, anything like that simply by slicing up the breadfruit and deep frying. So a really simple and again quite delicious way to prepare breadfruit. Um, Here again, variety can make a big difference, where some varieties are much denser than others. And so a really light and fluffy breadfruit variety, like Lippet, uh, you might have a hard time slicing it thin enough to make chips, for instance. Um, or even the breadfruit fry cuts out of Ma'afala, a lot of times they break, you don't get those nice long fries. But if you do a dense variety, like a Farah or Maopo, those will tend to hold their shape much better. Um, but if you're doing something thicker, like a wedge, like a potato wedge, right, then you might want a lighter variety because you don't want a big, dense, cut of breadfruit in a kind of potato wedge type of application. Um, Again, at that mature stage, behaves a lot like a potato. And so really using it for almost any type of potato replacement, especially for newbies, like people who don't have a lot of experience or it's their first experience with breadfruit. Um, this is one of my suggestions, is like a curry or a stew, or something that you would put potatoes in, because you can't mess it up. If you dice up breadfruit and throw it in a curry in place of potatoes, it comes out good every time. And we really want people's early experiences with breadfruit to be a good one. So that's one that we suggest quite a bit. Breadfruit hummus has also been a really popular application. Um, just here in Hawaii, there's at least three different processors making breadfruit hummus. So there's the Maui Breadfruit Company. John Cadman on Maui was kind of the first, and he's been a big mentor in the culinary world for breadfruit and really shared a lot of knowledge and a lot of excitement about breadfruit. Um, Lauren Shoup with Ulu also makes a range of breadfruit hummus, a bunch of different colors using things like beets and turmeric. Really, really beautiful presentation. Um, and the Hawaii Ulu Producers Cooperative, whose product is here, is also making a breadfruit hummus. A really very simple product that's still, 99% breadfruit. I mean, it's literally blended breadfruit, olive oil, lemon, and garlic. A little bit of salt and cumin and tahini for flavor, but a really, really simple recipe. I know a number of people who make a homemade hummus, um, and a really nice application, very good flavor. So this isn't mine, but this is my all-time favorite way to prepare breadfruit. Is kind of a twice cooked patty. So you kind of par steam your breadfruit so it's soft enough to work with. Cube it up and throw it in a bowl with onion, garlic, and Worcestershire sauce and um, some salt and pepper. You mash that up, form it into a patty, and then you pan fry those. Another one that to me is just like impossible to mess up. Comes out really, really good every time, and is kind of one of my go-tos. And again, you can get creative. Like literally anything you use potatoes for, you can use breadfruit for. So I've had some great ulu shepherd's pie, ulu au gratin, ulu based soups. So many different ways to use it. Really, really versatile, and yeah, a lot of options out there. So again, as that fruit ripens and gets sweeter, it becomes very popular in desserts. Uh, Probably the most famous and popular item here in Hawaii is Pono Pies, again by Maui Breadfruit Company, John Cadman over on Maui. And he has just done an amazing job putting together a gluten-free, dairy-free, pretty much exclusively local product that's based on breadfruit and making it very popular. And he's been a great ambassador and innovator in the breadfruit world. Chocolate Ulu Moose has been something that has come to the market recently from the Hawaii Ulu Producers Cooperative. Um, Freezes very well and is absolutely delicious. And the chefs have been making a whole range of ulu based desserts. These are typically not done with flour, but actually the fruit itself. And we will talk about flour just a little bit. But the ripe ulu, when it's nice and soft like that, it's typically mixed right into the batter of almost any um, type of baked good. So whether it's a cookie or a muffin or a cake or pancakes, you can often cut down a little bit on the egg and liquids and use yeah, some of that sweet, soft breadfruit in place, and adds a little heartiness and flavor to your baked goods. So, wanted to talk very briefly about processing. I don't think many people uh, have the scale to, engage in substantial processing on their own. But we are seeing the emergence of um, food hubs and farm cooperatives that are collectively pooling fruit to get greater volumes. And at that point, it might make sense to do more processing. So the two major forms of processing we are seeing, in addition to making final products like hummus and mousse and whatnot, um, one is this kind of par steamed, what they're calling recipe ready ulu. So this is often peeled, cored, quartered ulus that are partially cooked or mostly cooked, kind of par steamed, and then quickly cooled and frozen. And this is done both to ensure that there's a year-round supply outside a season, but also for the added convenience of the consumer. So a number of consumers do not, for instance, want to deal with a heavily latexed fruit inside their kitchen and getting, glue on their knives. And even chefs, if they're willing to engage with breadfruit, um, may not have the time to sit there and peel breadfruit in their kitchen and deal with the simple prep. And pretty much whatever you're going to do with breadfruit, par steaming it is a good first step. Even if you're going to make chips or French fries, kind of par steaming the ulu and then slicing and then frying is often a good way to go. So this processing method is kind of eliminating a key first step for all the consumers, doing that in a centralized location, again, and then freezing it so that you have a shelf-stable product to get through the year. Another common application is flour. Um, so we are seeing the proliferation of breadfruit flour in a number of countries. Here in Hawaii, it is a very difficult price point to meet. Uh, so if you take into consideration that breadfruit has about a zero point 0.3 drying ratio, and also that there are some losses associated with the peel and the core of the fruit as you turn that into flour, um, it essentially takes about 5 pounds of raw fruit to create 1 pound of dried flour. And, in Hawaii, where the going price of breadfruit is around $1 a pound, um, that means your flour costs $5 a pound just in supplies. And then, of course, you have the actual processing, packaging, uh, storage, distribution, the whole rest of the value chain. So when we looked at the feasibility of breadfruit flour in Hawaii, in order for the farmers and the value chain to all make, uh, a reasonable margin on what they're doing, it has to hit the shelves at, 15 bucks a pound. And when you compare that to wheat flour at something at like 18 cents a pound, that's a very, very hard sell, 100 times the price. So to date, we haven't seen substantial flour production in Hawaii. There are definitely several, I would say, boutique producers who are making flour and selling to individual chefs or doing direct sales. Um, uh, but there is not a large scale production and distribution of breadfruit flour in Hawaii yet. Um, Voyaging Foods, Bryn Foster, it's done um, the most serious effort to date in getting commercial breadfruit flour out to market. Um, And there are some new projects in the work in Hawaii. So I think we will see a continued increase in breadfruit flour, and hopefully through that we'll also see a decrease in the price. Um, but yeah, the flour processing right now is a little bit cost prohibitive. That said, a lot of people make home flour. It's a pretty simple process of shredding and drying the ulu and then pulverizing it. If you have a Vitamix blender, those do an amazing job at milling breadfruit, dried breadfruit. Um, and as well, yeah, if you have an actual mill, either a grind mill or a ball and hammer mill, breadfruit processes really well in any of those. Um, One trick for finer flour, if you dry it first, and then when it's nice and dry, throw it in the freezer for a couple hours, um, and then throw it in your blender. I find that you get a finer particle size and a nicer grind out of your flour. And finally, I just want to say that over the last several years, we've partnered quite a bit with the Hawaii Ulu Producers Cooperative to create a range of um, educational materials around breadfruit for things like propagation, pruning, nutrient management, and all of these pamphlets are available for free online. So this is our web page here, um, and we have links to videos, and yeah, again, a lot of little, 2 to 4 page pamphlets that kind of give you an overview of several breadfruit topics. So if you're looking for further reading, this might be a good place to start and check out. And with that, as always, want to say thank you to people who have funded our work and effort over the years, as well as a lot of key partners and people who, yeah, have just been instrumental in making it happen. And with that, I'll say thank you, and yeah, let you know that I am happy to talk or answer any questions. This is my email if anyone wants to get in touch with me. Thank you. Hui hou.